Hello, and welcome back to the Audible Finish, where we discuss the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I am your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasio. Welcome, Thanasio.
For the last time in 2023, it's great to be here.
We hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas, or if you don't celebrate Christmas, a wonderful holiday break. And we wish everyone good fortune ahead of the new year, as Thanasio just briefly touched on. In this week's episode, we review the event from WWE Smackdown, which saw the continuing beef between Randy Orton, AJ Styles, and LA Knight result in the announcement of a triple threat number one contenders match for Roman Reigns' WWE Universal Championship. Later on, we'll also talk about what happened in AEW, including the shocking revelation that Samoa Joe is in league with the devil. Does he know who the devil is, and will their identity be revealed at World's End? We'll discuss that and more later on. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. Well, Thanasir, on that note, let's move in onto WWE Smackdown. Do you want to take us through Smackdown?
Well, yes, for the final SmackDown before the holiday period, saw a new look AJ Styles opening up the show. It's a trench coat slash hoodie get up that is donning the AJ Styles at this point. He wants Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble, just like Randy Orton and LA Knight. And obviously, Nick Aldis sets up the number one contenders match. And Dimitri, I wanted to bring this up. I really, really miss having number one contenders matches for the world title. It's really been so long, and we're finally getting some actual long build up for this one because we've got the match coming up at SmackDown's New Year's Revolution, which means that the next episode of SmackDown is actually going to be a build up somewhat of that one, and that's actually great to see. It's almost like one of those TV specials that AEW holds, except this time it's being done on WWE television. So just to get back to my original point, it's been a long time since we've had a number one contenders match to decide Roman's number one contender. I think it was like Logan Paul kind of got parachuted in there. Before that, remember how Cody obviously had won the Royal Rumble much earlier on in the year, but we even saw John Cena coming up as an opponent, and a lot of these times it's just been parachuting in there, and it's really refreshing to see someone earning the right for a world title shot. Don't you think so?
Absolutely, completely agree. And the thing I love as well here is that there are multiple options. Like at one point, it kind of felt like with Roman, who can he face? And now we've got three viable options that I think everyone's excited for. Two of which he hasn't faced for this particular title during this
Mm,
reign. So it's nice to see that.
indeed. And later on, to open up the show's matches, Damage Control took on Bianca Belair, Shotzi Blackheart, Zelina Vega, Michin Mia Yim in a chaotic holiday fun, or rather holiday havoc, 8-woman tag. And the surprise was that Isla Dawn and Alba Fire emerged from a very large present box at ringside, and they laid waste to the Kabuki Warriors, Asuka um, and uh, and her partner, not Io Sky. What's the other one called?
The other partner
Yes,
for
never mind. This frees up the finish, which sees Mia Yim hit a massive diving senton onto Io through the table. So we've got a table spot for the victory. Next up, Dragon Lee took on Butch for the North American title. The champ did retain, of course. And getting up to talking point number 2, Kevin Owens took on Carmelo Hayes in semifinal 1 of the US title number 1 contenders match tournament. And I think you'll agree with me. This was an awesome TV match. Now, Kevin Owens did get the victory after the Swanton bomb. It wasn't even the power bomb or the stunner. He had a Swanton for the victory. But what I want to emphasize here is that showcasing wrestling matches on SmackDown should be much more of a focal point, because this is where WWE can rival the AEW product. AEW makes a point about their offering being about the wrestling show. This is where WWE can say that we can do what you do and do it better. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there is a point to make on that. And interestingly enough, as well, we're talking about that attitude. This week's SmackDown actually had more matches on it, but maybe perhaps not um screen time wrestling, but they actually had more matches than what Dynamite had, which is the first time I can recall it almost ever, really.
Indeed. And in the other semi-final, it was Santos versus Bobby Lashley. There were masked fans that attacked the Street Profits at ringside. They provided the distraction for Santos to roll up Bobby Lashley and steal a grand final spot. So that was a bit of an upset victory, I would say. And it turns out these men unmasked. It's Humberto Carrillo and Angel Garza. The new faction is on SmackDown. It's a reunion of sorts, of the Legado del Fantasma, or the perhaps Legado World Order, I believe is how Santos characterized it on social media. In the main event of the evening, AJ Styles took on Solo, and this ended in a disqualification finish after Roman Reigns interfered. And then, of course, there is a holiday brawl that closes the show, which ensures that the three number one contenders match participants have a nice little battle to close the show and to close out the SmackDown just before the holidays. Final talking point, because that is the end of the show, but I did want to bring this up. SmackDown is, in its completion, a 2-hour program. And when you remove the advertisements, this past episode was 1 hour and 23 on the advertisement-less version on the Australian broadcaster's website here. So I did a little breakdown of this 1 hour 23. And if you account for the core product of SmackDown being characterized by in-ring promo segments and in-ring matches, but removing the ads, the entrances, the backstage segments, all the in-between filler, the breakdown is, of the 1 hour 23, 51 minutes is core product and 32 minutes is entrances, filler, and backstage. So that's in magnitude more than a third is filler of the actual product. Now, to put that into context then, it's less than half of your 2-hour program is actual core product. And I thought that figure was pretty astounding, to be honest. It just shows where we are at this point. Obviously, I had a little bit more time on my hands this week with the holidays. But I'm going to do a comparison with this later on when we discuss Collision as well. So just bear that breakdown in mind. It's 51 minutes out of a 2-hour program. Dimitri, that's my SmackDown recap. Over to you.
Well, normally we would be doing a Raw recap, but Raw did a recap of its own this week. They did a best of 2023 episode, and I tuned in just to see if there was anything interesting, aside from some interviews they were conducting with a couple of the talent like Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, Jey Uso. There really wasn't much to talk about. So instead, I thought, why not talk about one of the bigger items coming out of WWE this week, and that was CM Punk's first WWE match in nearly 10 years. CM Punk wrestled at Madison Square Garden in New York against Dominic Mysterio on the 26th of December for the Americans, and this was his first match in the company since January of 2014 when he was in the Rumble. So naturally, this was the only time a full recording of a house show match made its way onto YouTube, and we had the luxury of being able to watch the match. And I said, what were your thoughts?
Well, you'll recall, because we watched it together, my first reaction, because it was a very quick visual, was CM Punk is looking very thick. You saw the body shape was quite thick set. I'm not going to body shame him here. That's my observation, mostly because we've seen CM Punk in various body types. If you recall when he was cutting for the UFC, he looked like a bit of a skeleton, really. I mean, I had never seen him quite that skinny. But look, as far as the match, I was a massive fan of the finish, because the finish, for anyone who hasn't seen it, essentially was a reversal of a suplex where he lifted Dom from the suplex attempt that he was making onto his shoulders, rotated around into the fireman's carry to deliver the GTS. And my reflection to you actually in the moment was that sort of a finish you could save for a televised match, for a live broadcast match. It was very smooth, very visually pleasing, and I thought really creative. And for a house show, it was a good way to finish a match.
Absolutely. And I wouldn't be surprised if we do see it happen on TV because obviously this was intended for a house show. House shows are typically a place in which wrestlers are allowed to experiment
Mm-hmm.
and try things out. And if that was an experiment to see if it works, well then job well done because it looked perfect.
Job well done indeed.
And I think it's important to note the crowd in the video was sort of chanting, "Oh, you've still got it," type things, which is nice. And I think it's something though that it speaks to the fact that while AEW has a presence, there is still a lot of casual wrestling fans that don't know it exists and had no idea that CM Punk actually returned to wrestling 2 years ago.
Mm.
Which isn't so much a criticism, it's just more of an observation, a comment based on what seems to be prevailing. Even I've had friends that are very much casual wrestling fans, and they spoke to me about Punk's return to WWE, and I had to tell them that actually he came back to wrestling a couple of years ago. They had no idea. So maybe there is something to be said that AEW still has ways to go to sort of bring in further fans to their product.
It's a challenge to bring in the mainstream, essentially.
But there is something they do that I'm a big fan of, and it's something that WWE is now doing, and this is the idea of special episodes for their weekly shows. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, as you mentioned earlier, Thanasi, Raw and SmackDown are doing special themed New Year episodes. For Raw, it's Day One, and for SmackDown, it's New Year's Revolution. And they've really built up the sense of these are important, especially in the wake of having recap shows the week prior to those special episodes. Is this something you'd like to see more of in the coming year?
I would. I would like to see this more. I think though, one of the drawbacks of doing these TV specials is that you risk creating just too much hype around things to the point where it has no meaning. And what I mean by that is WWE already has monthly pay-per-views. So in order, like if you wanted to introduce TV specials, then you're kind of oversaturating the specialness, so to speak. Whereas for AEW's structure, it works a lot neater because they have fewer pay-per-views. So you can have can I refer to it as like a pay-per-view light event, if I can phrase it that way. Um, that being said, that being said, I do think it's a good idea because this is a particular instance where we've got a 2 month gap between pay-per-views, specifically between Survivor Series and Royal Rumble. So it works out very neatly. Never and indeed borrowing names from old pay-per-views, I think is a really good way to go about it. Similar to what they were doing on NXT as well with Vengeance Day, even with borrowing the what do they call it? The in your house nomenclature.
Yes. To that point, would you be in favor of a move towards fewer pay-per-views in WWE that not only create less events that they have to book, but then also allows space for special episodes to make the TV product feel even more important at certain times?
I think as a fan, I would like to see them trialed, but it's hard to go backwards because it could be seen in one form as regression. And WWE has actually been moving towards bigger pay-per-views because the big four, obviously one of them is now a 2-day event in the form of WrestleMania, but the other three of the big four, and I think even Money in the Bank was being considered at one point, they've moved towards a stadium configuration rather than an arena configuration. And I've always been a big fan of the arenas because of the acoustics. I think it's much better to have everyone close in together, bouncing off the ceiling, have that sound going. It would have been amazing. But I don't see WWE actually moving towards this model personally.
Let's now move on to AEW, and we're going to start our discussions with what happened on Collision. So, Thanasi, you said there was something about Collision you wanted to discuss privately, and that was related to the Continental Classic, correct?
Indeed. So the Continental Classic saw, at least in the opening stage, Bryan Danielson versus Claudio Castagnoli. It is an intra Blackpool Combat Club derby. Bryan Danielson needed to win to qualify without any tiebreakers or a draw. He just needed some kind of a point to guarantee his qualification. Claudio needed to get victory in order to qualify with a potential tiebreaker. So there was a straightjacket powerbomb spot towards the end that was transitioned into the triangle choke by Danielson. And that was also changed into the neutralizer. So that was a nice little sequence there. We had the sharpshooter in the center of the ring right at the death. Claudio opts to instead hit an uppercut and pin his opponent, but the time expires. So a draw did end up being enough to get Danielson through. Claudio is out. I would have liked this match to be later on in the show, just to keep that hype going, just to have perhaps Brody getting a victory to create pressure. But as you'll hear me say in a couple of moments, that wasn't where they ended up going. So we just saw Danielson guarantee his qualification. The Acclaimed successfully defended their trios titles against Top Flight. Limitless Keith Lee emerged victorious against Brian Cage, with the highlight being a massive superplex spot with two big meaty men. Christian Cage and Nick Wayne invited his mother to explain her actions against Adam Copeland, which turns out it was loyalty for her boy. She is now the matriarch, Mother Wayne, and it's going to be Christian versus Copeland at World's End in no disqualifications. Just a brief recap, because now I'm going to go on to the Continental Classic again. Brody King took on Daniel Garcia. The highlight was Garcia got King up for a massive side superplex off the top. Not a superplex. It was a deadlift side suplex, which just looked visually very pleasing. And he got the victory with a jackknife roll-up. So it was the Christmas miracle. And it was through this that Brody was mathematically eliminated. So he had a chance to actually create pressure there with a potential tiebreak victory, challenging Andrade, but that was removed from the equation. And the House of Black also make an attack. FTR makes the save, yada, yada, yada. I wish we could say more about it, but it looks like we're going to have something coming up at World's End or later. Sky Blue and Julia Hart also took on Abaddon and Thunder Rosa, where the babyfaces got the victory. And now, the main event. Eddie Kingston took on Andrade El Idolo, and this was characterized as a do or die for Eddie, because Eddie needed to win to reach 9 points, be equal with Andrade, and having secured that victory against Andrade on this evening would mean that in the head-to-head, no Brody King involvement, that he would qualify through. And indeed, Eddie Kingston did emerge victorious, exactly as we've said. He is going to face Bryan Danielson, as you're going to tell us, on the Dynamite episode in the Blue League final. We predicted Eddie Kingston would get through, didn't we?
Yes, we did. I think thematically it just needed to happen. It wouldn't have worked as well if he hadn't. So fair play to him.
My thought on this whole structure, because when it comes to the final round, in football, right? Because in the final round of football, you want to mathematically remove the possibility of play for a draw, or it doesn't matter if you lose, just in case someone else might have a result that goes your way or whatever. You can't have that in wrestling because we don't have simultaneous matches going on. But I think I would have preferred the structure to have been Claude, or if Eddie was going to get the victory here, I would have preferred it to open the show so that there was pressure on Claudio, or to make that draw in the end all that sweeter. And of course, perhaps even have Brody King come out on top as well. As promised, I want to make this comparison here. So in the same way, recall that SmackDown was a 2-hour show with 51 minutes of core product. I did the same for Collision, which is also a 2-hour product. Now, Collision has the advantage of the Fight TV stream broadcasting through commercials with commentary and all. However, I was looking at a different version where you might not know, America has picture-in-picture for some of the advertisements. But the pure advertisements, where nothing's happening during commercials, they were about 13 minutes or something. So if you remove them from the equation, you have that full fight TV stream, which is 1 hour, 46 minutes or something like that. But that would be unfair. So I haven't counted it that way. I've counted it as when it's picture in picture, it doesn't count as part of the core product. So the calculations are in. When you remove the picture in picture, backstage, the entrances, all that other kind of filler, Collision has 32 minutes worth of filler. In contrast, 72.1 minutes approximately, so let's just say an hour 12, is core product of in-ring action going on. That is a massive difference compared to SmackDown. It's a difference in magnitude of roughly 20 minutes. So when we talk about Collision being a much more in-ring focused product, it's a lot better, and especially for a live fan as well, because when you're a fan, watching a backstage segment from home is no different to watching it on the screen, on the Tron, in the arena. You're the reason you're showing up and buying a ticket is to see that in-ring product. And based on the numbers here, Collision is the one making that offering. So Dimitri, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that comparison, but I think it's pretty clear which of the two weekend shows is much more focused on wrestling.
I that's a damning comparison. It's not one that surprises me as a fan that sort of somewhat pays attention to that sort of aspect. You can pick up on it if you regularly watch both shows and both companies, if I'm being frank, because I think Dynamite's fairly consistent to what Collision does, as is Raw to SmackDown. The thing that concerns me though is with AEW is that they have so much of that wrestling going on at the same time that sometimes they struggle to differentiate quality between their wrestlers, ability between the wrestlers, and make the matches mean as much as they can. Sometimes it is wrestling for wrestling's sake. A guy like Bryan Danielson, it's great to have him wrestle 20-minute spectacles with Daniel Garcia, but when you think about where they're at in their respective careers, sometimes they shouldn't be wrestling 20 minutes. Sometimes it should be 8 to 10. And there's those things sometimes that with AEWs that they care so much about showing off their own abilities that they don't know where to save it and where to utilize it. And I think that's something that MJF does really well, is that he's really good at conserving his match time for the appropriate spots. And that really elevates the standing of those matches that he does compete in. But that's just my opinion. Like the other side is being able to showcase everyone's ability actually gives everyone a chance to show what they're worth.
That's right. And you can actually become, well, essentially, you can become a star overnight, really. If you have one fantastic match and get a standing ovation from the crowd, that really is kind of like is your way of showing management. It's a way of showing the gorilla position that, hey, what I do matters. And I can do it regardless of whether you say go or not. Because in contrast, SmackDown, they said the word go, basically, metaphorically speaking, to Kevin Owens and Carmelo Hayes, saying, have a standout match. That was one contest out of 4, but also one match in a 2-hour program. Whereas I guess on the other side of the card, we had Brody King and Daniel Garcia have a really nice storytelling match of Garcia redeeming himself against Brody King. And then, of course, Eddie Kingston trying to get through to the next stage. You know, he's trying to prove his worth. And we also had some good storytelling as well in the opening contest when we went to the time limit draw. The other matches, yes, indeed, were a little bit filler, but that's going to happen sometimes, right? You got to have those mid-card matches to make the main event segments feel special. But that's my Collision recap, and I thought that was an important discussion to have to reflect for the end of the year.
Let's now move on to Dynamite for this week, and to sort of, since we're on the topic, we might as well recap the finish of the Continental Classic League Finals. So Jon Moxley managed to beat Jay White and Swerve Strickland to win the Gold League, while Eddie Kingston pulled off the heroic upset against the American Dragon Bryan Danielson to win the Blue League and that is setting up Jon Moxley versus Eddie Kingston at World's End for what they are dubbing the Triple Crown championships of consisting of the NJPW Openweight Championship, the ROH Championship, and what they're classifying as the Continental Championship. So that's it. What do you think about this result? Because for me, I very much like the pairing of Moxley versus Kingston. I think that that's a very good way to wrap up the tournament, and I think it would, as I said before, thematically it seems like it makes the most sense and the most intriguing proposition.
I think it is very intriguing. The second that Mox got the victory, my personal thought was it's clear that Eddie's going to win, not only because we would have predicted as much, but because it doesn't make sense to have another high tension intra BCC match. So that kind of made things clear. And I really liked, because in the same way that, you mentioned that sometimes it's wrestling for the sake of wrestling. Yes, this one already has value because it's a tournament final, but also there was that nice little promo exchange between Mox and Eddie Kingston at the end. Basically, it's going to be the everyman versus the established main eventer. So I think they really made it worth something there. I feel for Swerve because I really thought that this tournament was supposed to be kind of the rocket on the back of his the strap to his back. I thought that was going to really propel him forward. And he's going to go up against Keith Lee at World's End. Okay, it's a pay-per-view match, great. But I was really hoping that in 2024 we would see him being contender for the world title. And I don't know if this is a step in the right direction for him, to be honest.
Yeah, that is something I'm mindful of. If they give him the win over Keith Lee, you could argue that it's a good stopgap ahead of him pursuing higher honors,
Mm-hmm.
and it wraps up that breakup storyline they had that started earlier this year. So the I'd say that it's not all doom and gloom for Swerve. I'd actually say I'm a bit more worried about Jay White and where does he
Mm.
fall in all this? Because if right now he has no direction, and it does feel like he's going to have to sort of get back up after this loss. The other thing I wanted to discuss about with Dynamite was the situation between MJF, Samoa Joe, and the Masked Men, because we had a very interesting thing happen here where Samoa Joe was supposedly injured, couldn't fight, and MJF said, I'm going to come out anyway and defend the ROH Tag Championships. And he lost the match. But I have to say that in losing the match, they really did everything they can to protect him. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. MJF got hit by a third masked man while the ref was distracted with a lead pipe. He was then hit with a heat seeker by one of the other masked men who was competing in the match. And then there was a dirty pin following that, where the masked man put his feet on the ropes and his tag partner held onto his feet for further leverage to ensure MJF couldn't kick out. So essentially, they pulled out every stop possible to have MJF lose the match, but not really lose anything. What did you, firstly, before we get into what happened after, are you surprised that he lost the tag titles here?
I am. I am. Because doesn't this mean that we've got faceless men who are champions now?
Yes, and not just faceless men, but hired goons.
Hi-
Faceless men.
Goons, hired goons.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think what I mean, I'm trying to treat it a little bit as a sport because we kind of have to here. And when you don't know the names of your champions, it kind of makes life a bit strange. That said, if they're going to be revealed at over this weekend at World's End, it kind of makes it better because we're putting a name to a face or a name to a championship. But overall, like that was the reason that I was quite surprised. I was like, well, why would you do that? Anyway, let's hope that we actually get a result.
Well, the surprises did keep coming because Samoa Joe comes running out with a chair. Well, I say running out, rather limping out with a chair, and to sort of save MJF after he was getting sort of a post-match beatdown from the number of masked men. And they all walk away, the masked men that is, when we see their leader, the devil, appear on the Titantron, appear off, and then we just see text saying, pleasure doing business with you. And then Samoa Joe, like a good old Seth Rollins, hits MJF in the back with the steel chair. It looks like, and it seems like it has been confirmed, Samoa Joe is in league with the devil. Honestly, this surprise, did it get you? Because it got me.
Oh, it got me. I was actually wondering up until Samoa Joe actually moved his head and tilted it to the side with a bit of a sneer on his face. I wondered, was this MJF doing business with the devil? Turns out, no, it wasn't. It was dastardly heel Samoa Joe. Um, but no, this was a nice little swerve. I think though it would have been slightly cooler for this to have happened last week, so that Joe could have cut his promo on this show. Potentially, he's going to come out and cut an explanatory promo on Collision, right? So that could save it to get that final just little bit of push to the end. But it happened late. It swerved us, and it's going to make things interesting for World's End.
It is, and I find that curious you're talking about the explanatory promo, because to be honest, I think at this stage, it might not need it. And that's purely just based on Samoa Joe has been very vocal about what he wants. And he is a heel, so him betraying MJF, it's not like it's that uh, unforeseen or that improper compared to what he has espouted. The only surprise here is he said he wanted a fight against the strongest possible MJF, and now it doesn't look like we're going to get that.
No, that's exactly right. And that's why I find it a little bit contradictory. Like, was this a swerve from the beginning, or did it become a swerve partway through? I'm not quite sure.
Well, let's see if MJF, as a superhero John Cena babyface champion, is going to be able to topple Samoa Joe. But before we get into that, Thanasi, I think it's time for us to make our AEW Worlds End predictions.
Let's do it.
So, to start off, we're going to go with the outcome for the Continental Classic Tournament final, and that is Eddie Kingston versus Jon Moxley. And this is obviously for the Triple Crown Championship, which is the ROH World Championship, the New Japan Strong Openweight Championship, and the inaugural AEW Continental Championship. And I say this has championships galore in its title, in its name. What is going on? Who is going to win?
Look, I think for my side, because this is the redemption of the everyman, it is Eddie Kingston coming back from 2 losses early on in the tournament, that he is well and truly going to be winning here. Partly, there's the counterfactual that I'm thinking about, and I just don't see Mox becoming ROH World Champion. I just don't see them putting that strap on him. And because that is the ultimate result from, that would be the ultimate result of a Mox victory, I am going with Eddie Kingston.
I'm going with Eddie Kingston too, purely because of that last point you make, which is I just don't see Moxley gunning for these titles right now. Whereas with Eddie, I do see him being able to contribute in all of those aspects and be able to defend. And the other thing that I find interesting is they announced a couple of weeks prior, I believe, that whoever wins the Continental Classic would defend it in the next year's edition. And I just think that rather than restricting Jon Moxley to Continental Classic status again next year, give yourself time and see if you want him there or if he's going to want to be doing something else at that time. Whereas with Eddie Kingston, you just feel like in a year's time, he probably will still be in this sort of position. So it makes sense. And you might as well give him an accolade because God knows he's earned it.
Oh, yeah.
Next up, we have Julia Hart versus Abaddon for the AEW TBS Championship. And I think this one really is a simple prediction. I think it has to be champion retains here with Julia Hart. Do you agree, Thanasi?
I frankly agree with you. I think Abaddon was an easy transitional #1 contender, is how I refer to them. Even though she's had a fantastic win-loss record this year, don't get me wrong, I just don't see her being the one to unseat Julia Hart. So that's why I'm going with the champ.
Let's see if we agree on the third match, which is going to be Timeless Tony Storm versus Riho for the AEW Women's World Championship. Thanasi, who have you got for this one?
Well, once again, I'm going with the champion retains. I think that the real money from this storyline is not about Tony Storm versus Riho. I think it's in the ultimate end game, which is Tony Storm versus Mariah May, kind of like an admiree breakup angle, so to speak, like a Mickey James or Trish Stratus vibe. I think that's our ultimate Endgame. Maybe with Mariah May winning the championship later on down the line, perhaps if it's a lengthy reign and she really builds up. But I think that that is where we're heading here. And I don't see Riho being champion being conducive to that particular storyline.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And I think it's the other issue I have with the AEW Women's World Championship is it has felt like a bit of a hot potato championship this
Mm.
year. So I would like to see Tony Storm at least hold on to it for a bit longer and sort of bring a bit of prestige back to it
Yeah.
before she does drop it again. Next up, we've got what has been essentially a makeshift match because of Kenny Omega's untimely illness. And that is Ricky Starks, Big Bill, and the Don Callis family members Kyle Fletcher and Powerhouse Hobbs versus Chris Jericho, Sammy Guevara, Sting, and Darby Allin. So it's going to be an eight-man tag team match. Sammy Guevara tagging again with Chris Jericho. They're once again aligned. He's a bit of a hot potato heel face at the current time. Fantasy, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I think this is one where we're going to disagree because this one's a little bit more volatile. Look, I'm going to go with the heels on this one, mostly because Ricky Starks and Big Bill wear championship gold, and I don't think it would be a good look for their side to be on the losing end. And that being said, because Sting and Darby Allin did have a nice big victory, a feel good victory in California at the last big pay per view, that maybe they're going to be putting heels over on this one. So a bit weaker logic and a little bit based on 50-50 booking. But that's the prediction that I'm going with.
See, that's interesting because for this one, I am also sort of considering those factors. But for me, one thing that outweighs the champions' advantage, or at least the idea of protecting the champions, is for me protecting Sting. And what I mean by that is I don't think Sting has lost a match in AEW. And quite frankly, I think they should preserve that. I may be wrong there, but I'm just presuming that he hasn't lost a match from what I can remember. And if true, I would want them to save that one loss in his final match at AEW Revolution. So for that reason, I'm going with the faces. Moving on, we've got a grudge match, and that is Swerve Strickland versus Keith Lee. And I say this has been a match sort of months in the making, really, without any build towards it, but it's always been there festering underneath the surface, bubbling under the surface. This should be an interesting spectacle, but who does ultimately win the feud?
Look, I think you're right about that point that it has been there in the background constantly, always been teased regularly, just poking the bear, so to speak. And I think based on the momentum that he's got now, you can't look past Swerve Strickland. You just can't. But I'm hoping that this is not kind of a midpoint in their feud. I'm hoping this well and truly is the end for Swerve to say, I'm pushing back 2023. It's been my year of growth. This has been the last person or the last wrestler who's a thorn in my side. Next year we're gunning for the main event seat. And that's how I want this to go.
Yeah, I completely agree. This has been such a great year for Swerve in terms of really endearing himself to the AEW audience and really getting them behind him as a wrestler. With Keith Lee, it does feel a bit stagnant right now. That not all of that is his fault, but it is just how circumstances have gone. And for that reason, you got to go with the person who's got the momentum, keep them strong so that they keep pushing forward. And like you said, make sure that 2024 is the year of Swerve. So for me, you've got to back him as well here. We've got another sort of mid-card grudge match of some sort. They've been building up to it in recent weeks, and that is Miro versus Andrade El Idolo, who is with CJ as his manager, has CJ as his manager. So that's adding an extra bit of spice for this bout. But Fancy, how does this one fare for you?
This one's another interesting one because it's also been unclear what the direction is between Miro and his wife. It's kind of like bickering, but to what end? And it's making me curious. I think potentially we have an opportunity to have an explanation here of what CJ's stance is regarding Miro. But just for fun, I think that Andrade is going to get the victory here. I think there's more to come out of a CJ's client being victorious against Miro than vice versa. So I'm going with the luchador.
I don't really have any specific reasoning behind this, but my gut feeling is that Miro will win this. I think look, there's no denying he's a very strong man. He's got some beef to him, shall we say? So
Meat.
yes, I just think that he will be able to overpower Andrade in the end. I think they will have a great match, but in the end, it will be Miro that comes out on top. I am curious to see the sort of interaction he has with CJ after winning as well. Like, does he eye
Mm.
her down? Is there like a moment of silence there? Does she actually go back and do they reunite? Do the lovers finally come back together, or what the deal's going to be? So in a weird way, I am very curious to see what happens with this particular match. Perhaps more so than some of the other matches that even have titles behind them, because there's just that extra bit of intrigue there. All right, next we've got was probably the second most anticipated match and potentially the most anticipated match for some, and that is Christian Cage versus Adam Copeland in a no disqualification match for the AEW TNT Championship. This one has felt like properly decades in the making, for being honest, to have what feels like a very high-end championship match between the two. And I say this could go down so many different paths, but which is the one that you think it will go down?
Well, see, here's my thing. I don't think that we are at the end of the Christian, the patriarch angle, but I also don't think that he needs the strap necessarily for this angle to be legitimate, for it to be strong. I do think though that it strengthens it to the extent possible, but given that he's already defeated Adam Copeland, I'm struggling to figure out what else they can do here. Like, is it going to be another DQ finish, some kind of a dirty finish? They've already removed disqualifications from the equation. So I'm kind of trying to figure out how else they can go about it. And because I can't think of anything else, my conclusion, based off of um, based off of Sherlock Holmes, remove all of the impossible. I'm removing all of the improbable, which is not the right way to go, but nevertheless, by removing all of the improbable, what's left must be the truth. And it strikes me as Adam Copeland coming out victorious must be the solution. So I'm going with Adam Copeland.
I'm backing my boy Christian Cage, the father of wrestling, the patriarch of AEW. But I will have to admit that in making this prediction, I'm also reflecting, and I have a sneaky suspicion that this might be a repeat of Revolution 2022. And what I mean by that is in the match between MJF and CM Punk to ultimately end their rivalry at the time, MJF was betrayed right at the end by Wardlow, his right-hand man, who gave the ring to CM Punk to win the match. And I think in this vein that Killswitch is going to come out supposedly or seemingly to the aid of Christian Cage, and then he's actually going to betray him and finally turn against the Patriarch. Because right now it seems like that faction, in that faction, Killswitch is the odd man out, the odd person out. So that's something that I think could happen, and it's part of this idea of like the match is just this feud is just ongoing drama that involves all these extra members and not just the two brothers in the ring. But I still think that's just something that I suspect might happen. My gut feel still Christian Cage is going to win because I'd rather him drop it to someone that needs that win.
Mm.
And finally, we have MJF versus Samoa Joe for the AEW World Championship. And I say this is a match that even beyond the story they are telling in the ring has intrigue outside of it because of the supposed contract expiry of MJF. That's thrown a lot of spanner in the works for people in thinking what exactly can happen in this match. We've now got the devil situation. Samoa Joe has openly aligned himself with said devil. Does this mean Samoa Joe can dethrone the AEW World Champion?
I'm going to give you twofold logic, and each branch of my logic leads to the same conclusion. On the first point, Samoa Joe touched the gold on the go home episode, and as a rule, you touch the gold means you don't win the gold. So MJF wins by default. However, I had posed this hypothetical to you on a previous episode of the podcast, which our listeners can hear on the channel. However, what I predicted was, what if MJF gets through a hellacious match against Samoa Joe, comes out on top, big babyface moment, and then the lights go out. We hear some kind of audio that indicates Tony Khan is bringing back a superstar who had predicted earlier this year, in the middle of this year, that they would win championship gold, but has not yet fulfilled that prophecy because of suspension, partly. And that man is returned to AEW with an immediate title shot for the world title. Jack Perry returns from suspension, gets the victory. This is notably, he's defeating MJF, who has retained against Samoa Joe. So this is still consistent with my prediction. And that leaves everything up in the air for, will MJF re-sign for 2024, or will he be heading off to apparently greener pastures like his contemporaries CM Punk and Cody Rhodes? So that's where I'm going with this one.
Well, Fantasy, I can tell you right now, I'm willing to put it on the line. If that exact situation happens, I'm giving you automatic victory in these predictions. Mine is far more simplistic. MJF wins, the devil is revealed. I don't know who it could be, but I don't think it will be a title match that night. But if it goes down exactly as you said it happened, I'm willing to concede because, my God, that is a hell of a prediction.
I'm holding you to it. This is going on social media.
Okay, well, all right. Well, we'll see exactly what happens at AEW Worlds End. Well, Thanasi, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. Next week, we will review AEW Worlds End, where you have amazingly predicted an incredible tale of intrigue, and I can't wait to see what happens, just to see if it goes down the way you said it did.
Yep.
Well, great to have your company as always.
Thank you for having me. For the final time, it's been fantastic, and I'm looking forward to 2024.
We look forward to everyone tuning in the new year of 2024. And until then, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.